Marie.
That's okay. I was just thinking while we were hacked, you know, it's interesting because I think it speaks about safety. So
Yeah.
when do we feel safe to speak together? When do we feel safe in an encounter? And when do we not feel safe? And the hacking was kind of evoking in me, and I think that that speaks of our social milieu these days, a feeling that this could be on purpose. And it's interesting because it may not be on purpose, but you know, the hackers were insulting us, insulting you, insulting the group, the encounter that we were provoking. And and because these days it's sensitive, and because these days intergroup dialogue is not easy, I was just wondering, and the fact that we're wondering means we're not really safe. You know, is it on purpose? Is it targeted? I don't know how you reacted, Myrna.
I thought it was on purpose. I thought it was quite targeted. But we might be seeing it from different perspectives, basé sur notre historique, you know. But I thought that they chose this particular thing to target. And as you say, it brings up the issue of safety, not just personal safety, but psychological safety. What does that do to one's mind, to one's perception of where one is in time and space? How comfortable are you? How comfortable are you sharing with another? You don't know who that other is. You see a face, but you don't know what is hidden behind that face. What is in the cerveau of that person? What are they emitting? So for me, it was almost a frightening occurrence. And yet my inner self said, even if this is personal, do not allow it to take control of this situation. Do not allow it to take. And here they come again.
So we will go on with the conversation. I think it's important to be persistent in those contexts.
Don't give in to them.
Exactly. So I have the immense pleasure to present you Myrna Lashley. There are three things I want to share about Myrna and the conversation we want to have with you. The first is, and the most important is, she's my friend since a long time. I think almost 25 years. Mm-hmm. The second is, I think she's a person who knows about a lot, and I think that that's a good thing that she's with your group today about being Black in education. Why? First, Myrna has completed 2 PhD. That's not my case. So she has 1 PhD in oceanography and 1 PhD in psychology. But she also has a very long experience as a teacher, as a college teacher, and then as a dean, so which means as an administrator in higher education facility institutions, and she's now associate professor at McGill. So she has, that's my second point, she have embodied experience, what it means to be Black as a student, as a teacher, and in our education institutions. And the third point is because Myrna is and has been a relentless advocate of equity and of social justice, and a voice for the Black community, not only in Quebec, but also in Canada. And that to me is a sign of hope, because not because she have all the responses, but she is to me a role model of the way in which we can say no to status quo and say, yes, we can change things, and even if it's not easy. So thank you for being there, Myrna.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to introduce you to and Cecile's absolutely right. She took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, for me, the most important thing about Cecile It's not that she has all these accolades and she has achieved so much, which she has, but that she's my friend. And I don't use that word lightly because being a Black woman, I let very few people into my space that easily and open myself to them the way I do to Cécile. I share things with her that I wouldn't with anyone else. Cécile is truly my friend on a very fundamental level. And most importantly, I trust her. She has been an amazing ally for the underdog, not just for Black people, but for the underdog. She's a fighter. She puts her heart and soul into it. She walks the walk. She talks the talk. She's not afraid. And even sometimes when I feel afraid, I know Cécile's got my back. So that's one of the things I want to tell you about my friend, Cécile. She is an amazing intellectual. She can take things and look at it and put an intellectual interpretation on it. She knows the literature inside out. She and another friend of ours, Lawrence, have a gift that I do not have and that I've never cultivated, which is I know what people say. Cécile can tell you not only what they said, but who said it. I have to go look up who said it. She's got it up here somewhere. She'll say, A, B, and C said that. And I'll just say, this was said. So she's a font of knowledge. But most importantly, I mean, she's a professor. She's the head of the department. She works with all levels of government. All that is true. But most importantly, Cécile is a good person. And I cannot give her a higher accolade than that. Cécile is a good person and she cares. So this is the kind of ally that we in the Black community and that all people who are struggling to get from below finance line to above finance line, that's the person we want. That's the person we want as an ally. Thank you for being my friend, Cécile. Thank you for being you.
Thank you, Myrna. Well, we were thinking, and I also say hello to Jaswant, which is...
Is Jaswant here?
Yes, she is. And
hi, Jaswant! She's a third leg.
Yeah, she's a third musketeer. So
yes.
I hope, Jaswant, you will join the conversation. We're very happy to see you there. So we thought we would begin because we kind of had a conversation with Saba and some of you before. And we thought Myrna would begin addressing some issue which have to do with, for Black youth, with self-image and the pressure to perform. So let's start the conversation there. Myrna.
Well, the pressure to perform is immense. You see, it's a pressure to perform from inside the community and within the parental structure, but there's also the pressure to perform from without, except that they come from two different perspectives. And we saw this, Cécile, when we looked at the school study, what the students were telling us. From your parents, from the community, we all want you to do well. And it's unfortunate that you carry us on your backs because we look at you and we say, when that child succeeds, the community succeeds. And I know it's an unfair burden to place on you. I'm very well aware of that. But when you look at the systemic situation in which we often find ourselves, your success reverts back to the community and we say, yes, somebody made it out. That's one thing they can't hold against us. The problem is that even when that happens, you're not assumed to be the carrier of knowledge. So there's that other side, from the systemic side, from the outside, that says you have to perform, you have to do well, but it's to outrun a situation which you did not create, but which you inherited. Another thing is the burden of being first. I made a note of that because 2 weeks ago I was giving a talk to the parliamentary executives about what it means to be first. Some of you are going to find yourselves as first. At first, it's a proud moment. You say, I've made it, here I am. But then what do we do with people who are first within companies? We send them into the diversity sector. We've turned them into the person who speaks on behalf of the entire community. And that person finds themselves having made room for themselves at the table, not with enough space and not with a wide enough welcoming mat that allows them to reach back and sponsor someone else. Very often there's nobody at that table to sponsor them. And they become what Sarah Ahmed calls, it's not really formative, it's not really performative. It becomes a non-performative things, such as the word has gone out, we have made this hire, and therefore we don't have to do anything else about it. And that person gets stranded. I'm telling you, I'm not going to take up too much more time because we're going to do this as a conversation, but I'm telling you that even when you sit at that table, use your elbows. Don't let anyone take that space away from you. There's a pressure on you to perform, but perform because you know that you need to keep your eye on that prize, that you need to make it, because there are others following you. I am standing on the shoulders of all of those who've gone before me. I invite you to stand on mine. And as I told you when I was here in February, when I spoke to you in February, I told you to reach out. If ever I can do anything for you, if I can help you, reach out, stand on my shoulder. I'll get back later after Cécile has made her opening remarks.
Maybe, Myrna, I would just want to echo what you were saying. When we were researching and we were working with the young Caribbean, English and French Caribbean people in Montreal. And what they were sharing with us is what you were saying, Myrna, this pride and burden of the parental and community expectation on their shoulders. They had to do good. And education was proposed to them as this goal, which would kind of save them from prejudices or racism and so on. And at the same time, it was painful because in reality, it didn't, because you had to do so much better in order to achieve whatever. And that was painful. And it is a relation, there is a relation to gender in the sense that it's a bit like before, you know, in the 60s or the 70s, to perform, a woman had to be excellent because things were not equal. So if you were a woman, you had to be better than a man. It's still true in certain circles. It's we're not totally out of a patriarchal society.
No, not at all, unfortunately.
But, and then those interact. So and the prejudice interact. So what you're saying, the pressure to succeed will also kind of, it depends on your, of course, on your language, certainly in Quebec, but also on your gender, and all of that will interact in the difficulty or support that you will find. But I don't know if you want to go, Myrna, one thing which was kind of discussed before we prepared the conference was the whole issue of self-image. So one thing is a pressure to perform, but also the whole question of how do you recognize yourself, or how do you see yourself when majority representation are so dominant?
But that's an issue with which I think I've struggled personally. It's a thing with which we all struggle. I think it's particularly difficult for Black and Indigenous peoples. But since we're focusing a lot on Black people today, I just wanted to say that there's a commonality between Black people and Indigenous people. And one of the things that I advocate is that we stop fighting each other for the supremacy of pain. I mean, the same things have happened to us. And as long as we keep doing that, the dominant group can keep dividing us and then they don't have to do anything. If we can come together and work as a team, then we can confront it together. But that's for a different day. But I'm just putting that out there. Our self-image, we get the hegemony defines or tries to define who we are, who Black people are. It tells you that if you're a Black boy and you're a large Black boy, a tall Black boy, the stereotype is that you are a criminal, you are a drug dealer, you are dangerous. You know, that's a message that's being sent. It's a message that we see in law enforcement. We see them saying and doing these things. Black women are told that their concept of beauty is not the right concept of beauty. They have to be very thin. They have to change their physical appearances, except for their derrieres, because everybody seems to want that derriere. But beyond that, you know, people they'll do things to their lips because they assume that that's how Black people look. Most Black people don't have huge lips or huge derrieres. We're just people. But the way we're seen, you know, our hair isn't right. Natural hair is not something that is supported. It's starting to be. There's a site on Facebook and on YouTube that's just dedicated to the self-image of Black women, and an important sector of that is Black hair. And I don't know, and what we're trying to do now, I mean, is really educate Black people to the history of their hair and what the hair signifies and what it meant before Black people became enslaved, that the hairstyle was a way in which you could identify clans, in which you could identify marriageability, and which you could identify wealth. But once people came here, we've seen people being told in the workplace, you can't wear your hair this way because it doesn't fit in with the norm. Your image of yourself is not acceptable to us, the dominant group. And they're being told that from the time they're children. Our children, there have been instances in Montreal, in England, Toronto, wherever, where kids have been kicked out of school because the hair is not a hair that fits in with the hegemony. That messes with a person's self-image. Children have had their hair cut because it doesn't fit in with what the dominant group thinks it should look like. So those are things, you know, how we address our own self-image may be one thing, but what's impinging on it, what's telling us that we're just not good enough. And as Cécile said, we have to try harder and harder just to get to this spot. It's ridiculous. And of course, we can't change our pigmentation, nor would most of us want to. And the last thing I want to say before I cede to Cécile is this whole nonsense about who's Black and who's white. Now, we know, given that the Genome Project has shown us that we share 97.7% of our genes, and that pigmentation is an adaptation to the environment. If that is true, and I believe it to be true, we're on a continuum from very, very dark to very, very light. Where is that line of demarcation where somebody becomes Black or somebody becomes white? It just doesn't make sense. And yet it messes with our self-image, because if we're only going to give credence and valence to the lighter people, to white people, to people near to the white, then what are we saying to people who are closer to Blacks? We continue that Fanon's and Grossfurgel's idea of above the line and below the line. That messes with one's self-image. We have to fight hard not to let that happen. It's so easy to fall into depression. We know one of the big things about racism is that there's a depression linked to it. We can't allow that to happen to our young people. So University of Ottawa and all the universities, you've got to look at your anti-racism programs. You've got to look at the messages that your profs are sending and that the structure of the university is sending. You've got to look at who you hire and who a student sees when he or she enters into that classroom. Do they see themselves represented? If not, you've got a problem. You're inadvertently harming those kids. Sorry, Dean.
That's okay. I would just to add, when we, a couple of years ago, we were in a high school in Montreal, a very diverse high school, and the students decided to address the issue of discrimination through a play, and they would come from all over the world. And they addressed something which is really addressed because people feel kind of uncomfortable with it. They addressed the issue of smell.
Yes.
You know, there were a lot of people from South Asia and people from Africa and people from the Middle East and so on and so forth. And it was kind of fantastic to see these youth and adolescents being able to address this kind of very intimate way in which we are both similar and different, and how these kind of unsaid norms, you know, but there was kind of amazing conversation where the young Black students would be, you know, but Black, they kind of smell at corpse. It's not really.
And the curry, remember the curry?
And the curry.
Yes, the curry was the big one.
The curry smell, and but able to, it was so jokingly, but also to address how this microaggression Emmanuel was mentioning at the beginning. So the microaggression are very often really deep under our skin. And it's not just about color, as you say, but it has a kind of a bodily dimension in which we try to adapt in numerous ways to the majority norms. And that can be harsh and a constraint. The way we speak also, the way we walk, the way we move in the world, they could be a constraint, and that can, of course, be hurtful.
And the code switching that we have to do in order to get through our day, and the mask that we have to wear. And there's a big difference when we sit around the kitchen table or we sit with our buddies and we can explain what our day has been like, and when we are with the other. So, you know, when we have to do that switch in the code and make sure we don't raise our voices too loudly, or we don't use slang. And if you go on Black Twitter, for example, it's a completely different thing than if you are on everyday Twitter. The way people use language on Black Twitter and the way people speak to each other on Black Twitter is completely different. If you're on Black Twitter, somebody can say one or two words and you know what everything else that's being said. Can't do that on everyday Twitter. And yet it is a place of harmony. It's a place where you feel safe, where even if you can disagree without anyone calling you the N-word, or so you're not afraid to say, man, I don't agree with you. And you don't have to be afraid. And that's an interesting way in which society has been set up. That I was reading an article a few weeks ago out of the UK, and the author was saying, you know, that for so long, people have been saying that Black students lack self-esteem. And the author said, you know, they don't lack self-esteem. That's not the issue. The issue is that they're so bombarded by systemic racism and systemic discrimination that they often retire, that they often
withdraw.
You know, they often withdraw. So it's not that they lack self-esteem. And then another question was about group cohesion. And this was the part that I found really, really interesting, is when the author said, you know, yes, Blacks going to their groups, because that's a place of safety where they need to do that. White kids don't need to do that. So when people say, why are Black kids in a group and white kids aren't? The author said, white kids don't need to be. Because it is assumed you're the dominant group and everything gravitates from you and towards you. Whereas with the Black kids, they try to go to a point where they know they're accepted, where they can be themselves, where they can talk about smells, where they can talk about food, where they don't have to be ashamed of what they eat in their homes and this music they listen to, and the way they interact with each other, because they have taken back the meaning of the N-word, and so they use it among themselves. It doesn't mean the same thing as when someone from the dominant society does it. So when someone from the dominant society says to me, why can't I use the word? I said, because you don't have the history, because it's not your word. So those groups, you know, it's not your word. It's not yours. And they're not using it in the same way you would be using it. And that knowing the word and listening to the songs does not give you access, does not give you entrance. You first have to be an ally. To be an ally, as you know, Cécile, people have to learn cultural humility. And if they can't have cultural humility and create that culturally safe space, there's no entrance for you to use that word.
So Myrna, you're leading us to our second theme, which was around mental health care.
Yeah.
So the whole issue is in a context where so life is not terrible, but life can be hurtful, and can be hurtful in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways in which we're not equals. So that kind of undermines some of our social myths. Some are more equal than others.
Mm-hmm.
And equity is a goal. It's an ideal.
It's an ideal.
It's not achieved yet. So in that situation where you do have sources of social suffering, so what is the role of mental health care? Well, one of the questions we could say is beyond Black youth. So are mental health services and mental health care, and I invite you to contradict me if you think the country, are they accessible? Well, as a shrink, as a psychiatrist, I would say no, they're not.
I would say no.
For the general population.
Yes.
And then the second question, again, beyond skin color, are they appropriate for use? Mm-hmm. And again, my answer would be no, they're not.
No.
They're not.
No.
We could spend a lot of time. So you see, there are different layers to the cake. So first, mental health care are not really accessible. Second, they're not use-friendly. Mm-hmm. They are not. We can spend hours on that.
And for any use.
And for any use. And then, of course, for Black youth, it kind of, this is a third layer. So it's even more difficult. So one of the problems with mental health care is in our training as psychiatrists, as psychologists, we learn and we do master a lot of things, but we're not really trained to address social suffering as social. We're trained to address individual factors. So what belongs to your genes, what belongs to your intrapsychic space, and we all have one, whatever our color. And we all have genes which can be more or less vulnerable. And then what belongs for some therapists to our family. And of course, we all have families, and you're more or less lucky.
However that is defined.
Or more, exactly. However the family is defined. But then what if the system and life hurts? You know, what if it's poverty? What if it's unemployment? What if it's discrimination and systemic racism? So poverty can be because it's more difficult to find unemployment, and that's, you know, the Canadian data is very clear on that. It's more difficult to find an employment if you're Black, or if you have an Arab Muslim name, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple levels of discrimination and systemic racism. And then in our mental health care, if we do not consider social suffering, it's a bit as if we're saying, okay, we understand you're suffering, all of that, but it's our diagnosis will not be about the system. Exactly. It will not be about our society. It will not be to say our society is wrong. It will be to say, you have a problem. It's got to be you. You're supposed to be stronger than all of that. Myrna, you always say you have a chip on your shoulder, so you are supposed to overcome this. And this, I think, in the mental health care could be very hurtful. I'll give you an example which comes from Latin America. Before, I used to work a lot with people who had been tortured coming from Chile in particular. And they were saying to me, look, doc, I don't want you to put me a diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The people there who tortured me, they were telling me that I was crazy. And now you're making me crazy. I'm not the crazy one. Mm-hmm. They were the crazy ones. Okay. So the idea is that with a lot of goodwill and involuntarily by using diagnosis, by using psychopathology category, we may exclude the individual another time. And that's a problem. That's a problem because if you belong to a minority and if you're Black, just like if you're LGBTQ or if you're Muslim presently, well, you're excluded, or if you belong to First Nation, you're excluded in some way from the society. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we put a mental health, a psychiatric diagnosed, it's a double exclusion. Yep. Not only you're from a minority, but you're crazy. And don't tell me that mental health disorders are not stigmatized. They're highly stigmatized, even if my profession. I can ask Jasmine if she doesn't think so, but they're very highly stigmatized. So the whole idea is by helping people, if we do not consider the political dimension of the situation, we may harm them. And it's very important then to consider that if you meet and try to help a person who is grieving, who had lost a loved one, you will recognize and acknowledge your hurt and the distress and the sadness and the anger. And you will say, in your situation, with what you're enduring and having lost a close loved one, this is normal. And I think that for somebody who endure discrimination or who endure marginalization, there is a need to acknowledge that the social suffering is part of normality and this is not craziness. Otherwise, we create kind of more stigma and more marginalization. So it's about this kind of, yes, mental health services, but let's be very, very careful to say, let's not individualize what is social hurt. Otherwise, we will hurt you, we will hurt our society, because when you hurt people who are marginalized, the majority also, and that's Albert Memmi, get dehumanized. So let's not go there. But let's create, as Jeanne-Marie was proposing, mental health skill, but be very careful that we can help, but we can harm also.
I endorse what you say. I certainly concur, and I would go a little step further. You say we may hurt. I say we are hurting. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm a little bit more harsh about it than you are. I say we are hurting. Having been there myself, I know we cause hurt because we've all been trained in the same way. We haven't, and I remember several years ago when I started talking about the social aspects, nobody wanted to hear me. It was, what are you talking about? We were still at DSM-3, DSM-3R back then when I was talking about it. And people were saying, what are you talking about? Come on, you've got a chip on your shoulder. Come on, you know. And now, of course, thank goodness, people are realizing precisely what you're saying. One of my problems is that if the mental health professional hasn't done the introspection to internalize the realities of the social existence of people who are not members of the dominant group, they could end up doing more harm also, because they stick only to the Bible, you know, I call it the Bible, to our diagnostic Bible, and try and put people into a category without really understanding what that person is saying to you. And if we don't have the skills and I'm going to use the word courtesy. If we don't have the courtesy to do our own introspection and understand what's going on, I don't know how we are fully helping that person. They're not getting everything that we are capable of providing because we're holding that little bit back to maintain our space in the dominant group. Because we are a dominant group when you look at mental health. We are dominant for those who come to us for help. And that's got nothing to do with race and color. And then within the professions, we've got psychiatrists, and then we've got psychologists, and then we've got social. So we've got our own lines there also. But I think people have to do the work. You know, I firmly believe that being against racism isn't good enough. You've got to be anti-racist. And if you're not doing that work to become anti-racist, I don't think that we're doing those who come before us looking for help. I don't think we're doing a good job. I don't think universities are doing a good job if they're not becoming anti-racist, if they're not being active in being anti-racist. I don't think they're doing a good job. Sorry.
Merci. Myrna, je pense que nous avons été très bavardes. Alors, on n'a pas fini de dire tout ce qu'on voulait dire, mais je propose qu'on s'arrête maintenant pour revenir avec Emmanuel et Saba au groupe.
Oui. Ouvre la porte.
So that we go on the conversation with all of you. So kind of inviting comments. Please feel free to disagree. Also, add question if you want, but your own perceptions and view of things would be very welcome.
Absolutely.
Et vous pouvez en français ou en anglais.
Oui.
Je ne sais pas si je peux peut-être commencer juste pour en attendant que d'autres personnes parlent. Déjà, j'aimerais juste m'excuser pour ce qui s'est passé parce que on était obligé de lock la réunion et de refuser plus de 100 personnes. Mm-hmm. Donc, I'm really sorry about that parce que c'est quand même bizarre d'être obligé de refuser autant de personnes pour une conférence aussi importante. Puis ce que je voulais demander, c'est qu'est-ce que les universités peuvent faire, surtout au niveau des professeurs? Parce que c'est une vraie question qu'on a, dans le sens que est-ce que des formations obligatoires, ce serait intéressant? Because at the University of Ottawa, we just had a situation where a professor designated the Black populations, the Black communities, with the N-word.
Yeah.
And it is like, c'est pas quelque chose d'assez joyeux. Et qu'est-ce que les universités peuvent faire pour outiller les professeurs. Je prends pour acquis que, disons que un professeur le fait de manière innocente. Désolé d'être aussi naïf, mais qu'est-ce que les universités peuvent faire? What university can do about it?
To whom are you addressing your question? I can't address it.
Myrna, you may begin because you've been on the Guild task force for that.
Yeah.
Just do begin, and I'll jump in maybe with Jaswant about the work in our division.
Well, my feeling is that people have to be trained, and I think it should be an understanding of employment that they have to go through the anti-racism training. I am a big fan of not harming people, but of promoting introspection. And I'm a big fan of, while that training is going on, of not blaming anyone, because the last thing you want to do is to rendre les gens coupables. You don't want to do that. So quand je donne les cours, jamais je vais dire que vous êtes coupable de quelque chose. Je vais pas blâmer des gens. I'm going to tell them, I tell them that nous sommes tous les victimes of 17th century colonialism. And that has sent a message to one side of being superior and to another side of being inferior, and that we're all struggling with it. I find that when I do it that way, people are less inclined to get their backs up against the wall. But I think that the universities they must do this, make this a function. You have to take anti-racism training. You have to do it. To me, it's je le prends pour acquis. It has to be done. And you have to do it for your students. You have to do it for the good name of the university. Allez-y.
Yes, maybe you see, Jean-Marie, recently with Jaswant, we have the Division of Social, and Myrna, the Division of Social and Cultural Psychiatry at McGill, and there were issue and strong discussion about some people, students, but also staff, not feeling safe, either because of gender issue and because of race issue. And we are, or think we are, a place where people should be highly aware of race and inequality issues.
Ils ne sont pas.
So what that means is, I don't think so. Of course, we need, as Myrna was saying, we need training in university and among ourselves and in health services. We do need a different recruitment policy in order to have professional bodies and staff which represent the population we serve. And that's very difficult, and it takes a very long time to happen. But we also need a continuous process of introspection and awareness. So in our division, we decided to have an equity committee and an equity officer. So what is a safe space where you can go and say, look, even if it's ambiguous, I'm not sure I feel respected as a Black person, as a woman, as a migrant, as whoever, as a Muslim, as an Orthodox Jew, as an LGBTQ member. And I think it's important to have that, to create safety while not endorsing a heightened level of political correctness, which will not allow us to have a conversation and a plural space where we're able to speak differences. So for prohibiting, and that's one of my concerns in university presently, there is a lot of political correctness. And I'm not sure, I think it's another form of violence. And René Girard was speaking of the violence of a society which censors certain types of discourse. So I'm not saying that we should, and there's a fine line, that we should push or admit hate discourses. Absolutely not. But are we able to speak about the discomfort and the inequality which come from differences. And I think this is an ongoing conversation which we need to have so that our university remain a very plural space where we have the right to disagree. We have the theoretical and the academic, I would say, duty to disagree in a strong way often. There is not one truth, but at the same time, be very aware that we're permeated by power relation and that this endlessly recreate inequities around social category. So I think if we're able to balance that and to say, okay, how do we ensure the balance between a free speech, which is absolutely needed to advance knowledge, and the capacity to, so no political correctness, that's not the imposition, but the capacity to be very respectful and to have an instance which ensures that safety is not ensured, it's never ensured, but that we can process the moments where we feel more unsafe. So it's a difficult, we don't have an answer, but it's a continuous process, I think.
Absolutely. And the base of that, of course, is treating each other with respect, recognizing that each of us has the right to, as someone said, has the right to our own opinion, but not the right to our own facts. We have to be truthful with each other. We have to be respectful of each other's opinion. And I agree with you that we can't let it devolve into this is the only way to see things. But when it comes to human rights, there is not a finite basket of rights so that we say, if you get yours, I can't get mine. As a matter of fact, all we do is, there's a lot of rights in the basket. It's not finite. So I think that's one of the things, one of the ongoing things that has to be recognized, that it's not a matter of you take from one to give to the other. And that's sometimes difficult for people to understand and for people to accept. It's difficult for people to give up the seat at the table, but they don't have to give up the seat at the table. We just have to get a bleeding larger table.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a lot of questions. So I will let Emmanuel to read the questions we have.
So we have a question from Jacqueline. The question is, how do we talk about racism with our families for people who are Black and adopted in white families?
You go, Cécile, first. I'm reading a question.
I'll take, yes, it's, as a child psychiatrist, I had family like that. I think it's when parents adopt a child, they have this idealized vision that they will be able to be the parents to protect this child, and be there for the child. And then it really depends on the parents. So some parents will be maybe in a fusional position, which kind of denies the parents who were there before, the biological parents. And that's often hurtful for the child because they don't dare speaking about these biological parents because they have the impression that they're betraying their actual parents, the people who love them and brought them up. So that's the situation which happened. Another situation which happened is that the children may minimize, and I've seen that even in with Black parents. The children did not want to talk to their parents about the racism they were undergoing because they didn't want to hurt the parents. And they were saying, my parents, they have too much on their plate. They're suffering. I don't have to impose on them. So often speaking of racism with white parents may be difficult because the children want to overprotect their parents. They don't want to hurt their feelings. Or it also may be difficult because they feel that they should be the perfect expected child. And if they suffer from racism, they're not, so it's their fault. They've done something wrong. If they were the right color, they wouldn't suffer from that. Or they can have the impression that, yes, the parents are not ready to listen, or they won't understand because it's not part of their world. It will break their dream. So breaking that is difficult. And it's difficult. I remember within the Filipino community, the youth were telling us we're not able to tell our parents about racism because they say, well, forget about that. Just ignore it. And that's a strategy which is called in the literature forbearance in front of racism. And in fact, there is evidence that it can help. So sometimes ignoring adversity can be helpful. Acknowledging, especially if you are helpless in front of that adversity. So all of these mechanisms can enter into play for a Black child adopted by a white family, even if, and I'm kind of taking for granted that the relations are good, and sometimes, of course, they're not good, and you have racism within the family, and that's, of course, another pack of worms, and I won't go there. So, but you see, it's eminently complex, and all of these can play in the fact that why do I find it difficult to speak to my parents? And beginning to untangle these reasons. Where is my fear? Is my fear that I'll get hurt, not understood, that I will hurt my parents, that I have to protect them, that I will betray them? Unpacking that kind of may need some help, because if you want to address your parents, then it's what are the obstacles? Why is it so difficult?
I think that that's one side of it. I think forbearance is an interesting one. I think forbearance works if the child is really well supported at home, if that child feels that they're really in a space of safety and strong love and strong family support, you can do forbearance, because you know that when the nonsense outside is finished, you go to a very safe place within your family. Forbearance, it can work very well there. I think another, pardon?
Just our research data was showing that in fact, kids whose family were very cohesive, that was for the Black Caribbean, but also for the Filipino, the effect of racism on them was much less.
It was much less. That's what we found.
They would endure and perceive discrimination, but it wouldn't hurt them as much.
It doesn't hurt as much.
The family was a shield.
That's right. Them. That's right. It was like a blanket around them that held them.
So it could be possible, but it doesn't mean that it's easier to address.
That's right.
To address your parents.
And in terms of, I think if you adopt a child, regardless of the ethnicity or so-called race of the child, I think it's incumbent upon you as the adopting parents to learn something about the culture from which the child hailed. You can't just adopt a Black child and learn nothing about Black culture, of any of the Black cultures, and specifically the one from which that child hailed. I had somebody come in that was sent to see me. She had adopted a white lady who had adopted a Black child. One of the things was she didn't know how to comb the kid's hair. And so the child was crying every time, and she resorted to using a tube of the vacuum cleaner on the child's hair. She just turned on the vacuum cleaner, and she said, well, I got all the dirt out. Nothing was sticking in there. And she never, I worked really, really hard with her to get her to understand what this was doing to that child's self-image and what it was doing to that child's sense of self. Because she really wasn't trying to harm the child. She didn't want to hurt him by combing the hair. So, I got her into a group without the Black women, but that doesn't matter what the solution was. But the point is that if you are going to adopt a child from an ethnicity other than yours, I think it's incumbent upon you to make every effort to learn what the reality is within that ethnicity and what the probabilities are of what that child will face growing up, and prepare them as best you can.
That's great. We have a comment and question from Elizabeth. She says, Myrna, I really relate to what you were saying earlier regarding those who are the first. The amount of pressure that one feels both internally and outwardly can be immense. I would love to have more tips on how to confidently elbow my way to create space for others without outwardly playing to damaging stereotypes about Black women in particular.
This is a very, this is something with which I barricade myself, for want of a better word, to deal with this. Cécile has heard me, and certainly Jasmine has heard me say, that when I go into a situation where I am the first and when I'm the only, not only the first, but only, is that I have a very short space of time in which to establish that I'm not here to wash your floor. I've been in situations when I waited too long and someone will say, oh, well, you know, you have to go to that door. It doesn't happen very much anymore, but you have to go to that door for the servant's entrance or something like that. That doesn't happen very much anymore. But I've never seen, and it's happened to me in court, where I'm sitting there as the expert witness, and they're looking for Dr. Lashley. And when I get up, the judge is astounded that it's this Black woman who's Dr. Lashley, because she had been talking to somebody else whom she assumed was Dr. Lashley. And so you're always trying to relocate yourself, always trying to say, this is not about me. Sometimes I tell myself, this is not about me. This is for everyone who's following me. This is not about me. This is about my child. This is not about me. And I say to myself, Myrna, you've earned this spot. I'm constantly reaffirming myself to say, your degree is real. Your degrees are real. The time you went to school is real. And most importantly, it's okay for me to talk back, to say, I don't accept this. Took me a long time to learn that I had the right to say, this is unacceptable. I will not be treated like that. Took me a long time to understand that I could say, if you're going to call him doctor, you're going to call me doctor. The danger in this kinds of things is that it can eat at us such that we start doubting ourselves and we stop even respecting those who look like us, even though they have the same degrees. And I'll tell you about something that happened to Cécile and me. Cécile and I were meeting with a student. And remember, Cécile and I were meeting with this student. And the student came in, and Cécile had asked me to come to this because she said to me, Myrna, come with me to meet this student. You're the expert in the field that the student is looking at. And I came in, that student refused to engage with me. She would only engage with the white lady, nice white lady, but not the same. She would only engage with the white lady. And what happened was that eventually I just sat back and said, I'm not going to keep trying to push myself into this thing to help this person. That's what it does to us.
And Myrna, in that case, the thing which kind of puzzled me or disturbed me the most is that the student was a Black woman.
Yes, I didn't say that. That's right. It was a Black woman.
I'm adding that because it's about what we call identification with the aggressors.
Yes.
So among the people we think we can trust, among the people we identify with, we can find allies, but we can find also people who will internalize this hierarchy and this category, and become, and there is some literature on that, and becomes whiter than the whites, in a sense, and that can give an impression of internal betrayal when you expect support from somebody and suddenly they turn your back to you and say, oh, but I'm looking for real power.
Yeah, I saw it as a cultural betrayal. I really did. And I just sat back and said, but that's what happens. That's what racism and discrimination, that's what it's not a victimless crime. That's what I want people to understand. There are consequences. Because you don't see a bruise on someone or someone bleeding doesn't mean that harm hasn't occurred. Doesn't mean that. And so how do you take your place at the table? Take your place at the table knowing and focus. I said to you earlier, I know it sounds trite, but you need to focus on the prize. You need to ask yourself, why am I here? What do I want to leave behind? Someone called me at 11 o'clock last night because I did a presentation at a federal agency yesterday. And some of the things that people were saying, not to me or about me, but about race and racism. And someone called me last night and said, Myrna, how do you deal with that? How do you keep so calm? How do you listen to that? And I said to her, when these things happen, I keep my eye on the prize. And I know that I'm going to be dead and gone before it's finished. But I know that at the end of my life, if I keep my eye on the prize, I would have left this world a little bit better than it was when I came. And I know that song, Pollyanna, but that's what you need to do. Otherwise, it will destroy you. You have to look for the greater good.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time. So we have time for just one last question. And the question is from the Dean, Victoria. And she asks, how do we shift the needle on recruitment? This university puts the highest priority on using hiring to support its strategic plan. And the priorities of the strategic plan are not typically domains in which there are lots of Black scholars. And as a dean, I am dealing with units which want to set their own priorities. I don't want either me as the dean or Central to say to them that they must hire in particular areas. I am constantly frustrated by this issue.
I answered the last one, you answered that one.
Vas-y,
allez-y.
Non, vas-y.
Well, I can appreciate what the dean is saying, having been a dean. I understand this. And especially, I'm reading what you say. They don't want either me or the dean or Central to say to them that they must hire in a particular area. This comes down to what a lot of the teachers see as academic freedom, and that you don't have the right to tell them what they can and cannot do. And sometimes they'll punish you if you don't go along with them, or you're always trying, as you say, trying to figure out how to tread that needle, what I used to do was try to see if I could co-opt the ringleader, or if I had somebody in that committee who saw things through my eyes. I remember one of my directors saying to me once, are you telling me that every time I want to do something, I have to think about race and racism, and I can't put the pictures up I want on the wall of the people I like, but I have to, because I said, this is all white. This is not good for our students. And I said, I didn't come right up and say, yes, you have to. I said, I think what should happen, this was a gentleman, I said, I think what we should do is maybe put only women on the wall. And he said, well, what the heck do you mean by that? I said, well, it's my space, it's my office. I can put I can put whatever I want. So I'm only going to have women teachers on my wall. And he grumbled at me. But the next day, I noticed that he changed some of those pictures.
Yes, maybe just to add to that, I would, because it's not an easy problem. It's not an easy problem because if we recruit more diverse people, universities are trying to prioritize that. It also brings bad feedback loop saying, okay, this is positive discrimination, these people shouldn't be there, it's because of gender, it's because of race, it's because of whatever we want to represent. And so it's a mixed blessing for minority. And I'm not saying I'm against that. I think we should go there now because they're clearly underrepresented. But I think there is a more fundamental problem in our universities and colleges, which is having a less monolithical image of what a good teacher is.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should educate and socialize people. And learning is not just about research excellence. No, it's not just about research excellence. And so how do we, in our education model, we tend to kind of, have a pendulum and switch all to a model. And now some models of productivity and so on, I think are highly detrimental in terms of the plurality of thinking, the plurality of model that we propose in our education institution. But that's a much wider reflection to have. How do we propose a variety of models and way of thinking which do not just represent an hegemonic society? We have a real problem.
I just want to add to that quickly is that very often we think when we hire someone, we think we're going after a cultural fit. They have to fit into our culture. They're going to get, my attitude is stop going for a cultural fit and go for a cultural add. And, as Cécile said, they're bringing something in, value what they bring. If we keep looking for cultural fit, things will never change. It will maintain the hegemony. And we get to say, look, we've got one at the table. And when we write our policies, we write the policies as though having written the policies means that this thing has happened or will happen. We don't look to see how could this not happen and how do I obviate that? So we hope that this helps.
Just once again to say thank you to Cécile and Myrna. Really thank you. Je sais la mésentente qu'il y a eu entre nous. On va pas en dire plus. Puis vraiment merci, merci, merci. Merci aussi à la doyenne d'avoir suivi tout le long et pour les questions, merci à tous ceux qui ont posé des questions. Vous me voyez aussi, très pas en colère, je pense que c'est pas le bon mot, mais très triste parce qu'on a été obligé quand même de lock. After the hacker attacks, we were forced to lock the meeting and de refuser plus de 100 personnes. Je trouve que c'est quand même pas la bonne chose, mais on n'avait pas le choix. Puis vraiment, merci encore et encore Myrna et Cécile. Et je pense que nous avons beaucoup appris et je suis bien content que plusieurs professeurs de l'École de psychologie de l'Université d'Ottawa ont pu suivre, étaient là. Donc, c'est quand même extrêmement important pour moi aussi que ce message-là passe également. Je vais laisser Emmanuel conclure en nous disant également qu'est-ce qu'on va avoir comme d'autres activités cette semaine.
Merci beaucoup.
So thank you everyone for attending. We will be having other events this week for the whole month of October. So today we had this great discussion. On Wednesday, we will have a self-care meditation session. On Thursday, we will have a Black students men's room. And on Friday, we will have a Black students women's room. So Thursday, it'll be for men and Friday, it'll be for women. So that'll be the activities for this week. And you can always send us an email or visit our social media for more information.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Black Students Wellness Month for the whole month of October. So we'll be having self-care meditation sessions. We'll be having roundtable discussions with actual licensed psychotherapists. You know, there'll be a group for men and a group for women as well. That and more. So this will be kind of like a little, almost like a dry run of that, but without an actual therapist. I'm not a therapist, I'm not licensed, so we're just going to be talking, all of us, you know, about how we're feeling. And that kind of relates to the mirror getting put into everybody's face. It's like, what have you been neglecting, right? Have you actually been spending time on yourself? Have you been taking care of yourself? Have you been getting enough sleep? Have you been doing all that stuff?
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, I think for me personally, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in the past few months is that you don't have to be, you know, going at 100% all the time. You know, before quarantine hit and, you know, when life was sort of, you know, normal back then, I was in school, working, and playing varsity sport at the same time. And like, thinking back at it, my schedule was super, super hectic. Like, you know, that shouldn't be the normal. You know, that shouldn't be the norm for someone. Waking up 6 a.m., going to a practice, you know, going straight to class, coming back for another practice, going home, you know, finishing some schoolwork, and then you barely get any time. And it's like, that's go for literally 7-8 months straight, right? So I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten from the past few months is that you don't have to be that, you know, machine, like sort of battery going at 100% all the time. There are days that you can, you know, literally just wake up and be like, yeah, I'm not feeling anything today, you know, and that's okay. You don't have to be that productive, you know, put out something every single day.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, the reason why that, like, as you were saying, the mirror is so big is now the lines between work and being at home is so blurred. Like, if I get an email at 9 p.m. and I'm at my desk, like, not doing work, then it's very instant. Like, I just flip a switch and I'm already in work mode, and I might work a couple more hours where maybe that time I would have rather been like at the gym or like maybe just chilling with my roommates. It's because now, like, there's no like physical allocation to work. So it's really hard. Like, I found it super hard at the beginning of quarantine to switch off. Like, I was actually sleeping and having dreams that I was responding to emails, and I would wake up and have emails and be mad confused. Like, yeah, I think I already wrote the response to this email. Like, that's how bad it was. My desk is literally right next to my bed. So I had to I got a Headspace membership for like meditation. Like, I started doing yoga and like just like different things where I was like, yeah, I can't be living my life like this where like usually that 8 hours I'm sleeping, my brain is completely switched off from work, but I'm actually like dream working or like whatever was going on. So I think like just like the disappearance of that line between like you're at home or you're at work was massive.
For those who are listening or watching, whatever you may be doing, we have resources for people who are, who are struggling through this time. We have support centers you can call. They'll all be, on the website that we have. And also the website gives like a breakdown of the most common mental health problems. So anxiety, panic attacks, depression, stuff like that. It breaks them down in terms of etiology, symptoms, treatments and stuff like that. So if you need help, just hop over to that website. If you just want to learn more about, the health problems, just go over and check it out. Yeah, man. Thank you guys again.